The climate crisis has worsened since the adoption of the 2015 Paris Agreement. Latest data shows that the 2020 is on track to being Earth's warmest year on record. Joining us via Zoom is Damien Naziveh, who was part of the Paris negotiations, with a recap on how we came to the final text of the agreement and why we need to implement the science to save the planet. Damien, thank you very much indeed for your time. Welcome to the agenda.
Hello. Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for taking the opportunity. Important topic to discuss, especially now. The agreement bringing together all signatories to undertake, I guess one would describe it as ambitious, efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. But take us back, Damien, prior to the adoption of the landmark Paris Agreement at COP21. What went into it in order to reach an agreement?
Well, basically what went into it was transparency and keeping in a listening mode with all the parties. It was a very intense negotiation process. The first version of the Paris Agreement came out actually in the second week of COP21, only like 5 or 6 days before the end. It was the first time that a text was shown to be as conclusive to the parties. And there were actually 3 versions of the text before the final one on the Saturday, December 12th, 2015. And we had to listen to really the point of view of all parties. And you said in the subject that there are 195 countries. So they're all grouped according to their interests.
Right.
And they were all, asking for their red lines. So in the end, we had to bring it back, all the way back and down to 3 main options.
Right.
One was the financial package. The other one was the differentiation. How much flexibility could we give to developing countries who have less capacity? And the third one was ambition. And the negotiation was really about financing and the flexibility, and we managed to keep the ambition as high as we could.
So just clarify the 195 countries that signed up to the accord. Originally it was 196, isn't it? Is it minus the United States? Is that how you get the 195?
No, I'm actually rounding up the number. It's 195 plus the EU.
Plus the EU.
Okay. On December 12, 2015, all countries adopted the agreement. Then there was a signature process. And as the signatures came in, the Paris Agreement came into force. And that was less than a year after COP21.
Right.
Now the US decided to withdraw only after that. And we expect them to be back soon.
Yeah, well, I guess that's promising, isn't it? Having the United States back into the fold, so to speak. The president-elect Joe Biden signaling his intention to rejoin. How big of a deal is that?
It's fundamental because the US can bring the force of its diplomacy. But we have to recognize that even when the administration of the US decided to withdraw, there was a collective in the US of states, of businesses that kept acting for climate change. And that's the strength of the Paris Agreement, is that it does not only belong to the states, but also to the civil society. That was one of the big game changers of COP21. And you've seen Greta Thunberg for the youth, for example. We always also think about local governments, about also the financial institutions. Everybody's got a stake in it, and everybody sees the risk and what's in it for them. So whenever the governments are not up to the task, they can always, keep on the good work.
Yeah, look, finalizing the Paris Agreement on climate change, just listening to you wasn't easy at all, from the verb tenses to the deals being cut, no small feat whatsoever. But in the end, you got those over 100 countries brought into the accord. 5 years later, Damien, what's the assessment? Are governments implementing the deal?
Well, 5 years down the road, the agreement is still alive. The agreement is an open-ended agreement. It will not end anytime. And every 5 years, countries will be asked to increase their commitments. And that's what's happening now. Today, with the Climate Ambition Summit, we expect around about 75 countries to announce either a new commitment in parts of their nationally determined contributions, NDCs, or long-term decarbonation goals. Like, for example, South Africa has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050, or other commitments such as commitments on finance or adaptation. So really, this is now the time where we'll see the test. Are the countries serious in ramping up the level of commitments for climate change? And today is the start, and the tally of the new NDCs will be done firstly in Glasgow in November 2021.
What about Africa, Damien? What are you hearing? Talk to us about the various countries in Africa and their climate strategies. And does it go far enough in giving expression to their commitment to the Paris Agreement on climate change?
Well, we all know two things about Africa. It's a very diverse continent. So it's hard to give an answer that is good for all countries. And what we also know about Africa is that it's very vulnerable to climate change, while it's not responsible for it compared to other continents. So my answer would be that there's a big opportunity for Africa not to follow the same development path as Europe, as the US, as China, and go much faster to a low carbon development.
Yeah.
In many countries, this will bring jobs, and this will also bring resilience in the face of what's ahead of us in terms of climate impacts, but also the fact that in the world, you're going to have less demand for coal, for example. And so you have to prepare for these times. And Africa, I think, has many trumps, without no pun intended, up its sleeve to be a strong force in the transition that is coming. For some countries, it's going to be harder, oil-producing countries, for example. But for most of the African countries, there's a wealth of renewable energy, and so I'm hopeful for Africa.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement's goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably, I guess, to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels. Are emissions being reduced at a rate that science says we need to? Talk to us about the use of science in fighting climate change.
So the answer is that, unfortunately, since the Paris Agreement, the emissions have kept increasing. So the answer to your question is no, we are not on track as far as the emissions are concerned. Science is extremely important. The objective that you mentioned, 2 degrees Celsius, is not a scientific goal, it's a political goal. So science is here to tell us, okay, if we're aiming for 2 degrees Celsius, firstly, here's what we need to do, and that the world needs to be neutral by the second half of the century, and it begins in 2050. That's why some countries are taking this goal for 2050, the most advanced countries. And also, science tells us what are going to be the likely impacts of a 2 degrees world. In fact, the IPCC 2 years ago published a report on 1.5 degrees. Already, the impacts with 1.5 degrees warming are kind of scary, and you can see that the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees can mean life and death for species and for crops, and so it's really important that we follow the scientific advice. It's true for the pandemic at the moment. It's particularly true for the climate urgency as well.
Yeah. How concerned are you, Damien, with regards to some world leaders, some politicians, some role players in this space, and their alleged perfidy with regards to climate change, pushing back in terms of questioning the science around it. How much of an impact is that having in terms of getting everybody on board in order to fight climate change?
That's a tough one. But I would say that having leaders take an irresponsible stand, in a way, against science has first and foremost a divisive impact on their society. It turns what should be a consensual goal and issue into a adversarial debate. I don't believe you. You're wrong. I'm right.
Yeah.
And this leads to divisions in the society, and then it can affect democracy at the same time. I think what we are seeing with the pandemics and with climate change really should show the public opinion what the leaders have in the bottom of their heart, and really, I speak for myself. I know what science tells me, and when I hear a leader going against it, I'm very sad.
You know, here's the pushback. Damien, this is the way the divine wants things to happen. It is part of natural course that climate is changing. Why should we worry? Things will rectify itself. Why is that argument not in line with what scientists are saying? What are, in terms of questioning scientists, what are you worried about in terms of that?
I'm worried about the fact that people say this on TV because it's simply not true. The IPCC is an organization of all the countries in the world, even the ones that are not so convinced about climate change. And this body of scientists provides everybody their best assessment of what science tells us. And science tells us that the variability of the climate that we're seeing cannot be explained by natural causes only. And it is extremely likely that their word, so it means like 95% sure, that it's caused by the growing concentrations of carbon dioxide, for example, or methane in the atmosphere. And of course, why are these concentrations rising? It's because there are sources of these gases, and the sources of these gases are man-made in the majority, your thermal power plants, your agriculture, etc.
What about COVID-19, Damien? And less travel for the past couple of months due to COVID-19, less emissions, one would say. Do you think it has had an impact in terms of emissions?
Okay, thank you, Blaine. The COVID crisis has had a strong impact on the economy and on travel, and we are going to see a decrease in world emission in 2020 by about 7%, which has never happened before. So it's a good news for the environment, but I think it's going to be a very small and short reprieve, and it doesn't affect all that science tells us and what we should do. In fact, science tells us that to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, this kind of decrease in emission should be seen each and meet the goals.
Yeah. Look, it's hard to disagree with around 97% of scientists who believe that this is a real thing, isn't it? And you see the effects around the world when you watch, in terms of wildfires, in terms of flooding, weather systems that you've never seen before happening now. So, Damien, we thank you very much indeed for clarifying matters. We appreciate your perspective. Be well.
Thank you.
All right, that was Damien Naziveh, who is part of the Paris negotiations on the adoption of the 2015 Paris Agreement regarding climate change. Important issue indeed.